to make. What'd you make tonight? They can tell you. They don't tell you. You know why they don't tell you? Because they don't want you to know. Listen, if you don't like how we run our business, go start your own.
The octagon, 8 sides, steel mesh, blood on the canvas. For over 2 decades, it's been the proving ground for the toughest fighters on earth. A place where legends are born and dreams are shattered in seconds. But behind the spotlight, behind the million-dollar production and the sold-out arenas, there's a story that nobody's telling. A story about the men and women who risk everything, while the people who control them rake in billions. A story about a sport that exploded into mainstream glory, while its warriors struggled to pay rent. In 2025, 2 massive events collided. A $7.7 billion media deal that promised to change everything, and a betting scandal that exposed the dark underbelly of a broken system. This is the fight that happened outside the cage. The fight for survival, for dignity, for fairness. This is the cage. The cracks had been showing for years. Fighters, men and women who sacrificed their bodies, their health, their futures, were starting to speak up, starting to push back. They weren't just fighting in the cage anymore. They were fighting against the very organization that controlled their lives. Their message was simple. We deserve more. We deserve better. We deserve higher pay. At the center of the storm stood one man, Dana White, the UFC president, the promoter, the pit bull in a suit, the man who turned mixed martial arts from underground brawls into a billion-dollar empire. He built this, he controlled this, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. White pushed back hard. He dismissed the critics, defended the system, refused to budge, because this wasn't just about money. No, this was about something deeper. This was about control, about power, about who truly owned the octagon and the souls who bled inside it. The tension wasn't just rising anymore. It was reaching a breaking point. And then, in the scorching heat of August 2025, everything shifted. August 2025, the announcement that shook the entire combat sports world. The UFC signs a deal with Paramount Global.
Obviously, the first would be Paramount, the new Paramount Skydance. David Ellison, the 42-year-old son of the media mogul, Larry Ellison. He's got this company, Skydance. They take over Paramount.
$7.7 billion, 7 years. Over $1 billion flowing in every single year. This wasn't just another broadcast agreement. This was a complete transformation, a total restructuring of how fans would consume the sport. The UFC was walking away from ESPN. No more traditional pay-per-view, no more fragmented distribution. Everything, every punch, every submission, every knockout would now live under one roof. Paramount Plus, 12 numbered events, 12 fight nights, 30 additional programs. Select major fights simulcast on CBS for the masses to witness. The strategy was aggressive and crystal clear. Move from the dedicated ESPN audience to mainstream America, to living rooms across the nation, to casual fans who'd never watched a fight in their lives. TKO Group Holdings had orchestrated the shift of the decade. This was the UFC's golden moment, their coronation as a mainstream juggernaut. But for the fighters who made it all possible, that was a very different story. Dana White stepped up to the microphone, and he beamed. This deal, he proclaimed, was incredible for the fighters. He painted a picture of prosperity, higher pay, increased visibility, life-changing opportunities on the horizon. He announced that performance bonuses would be going up, beyond the $50,000 standard that had been locked in place for years. The narrative was carefully constructed, perfectly delivered. The Paramount deal wasn't just good for the UFC, it was transformational for everyone involved. The fighters, White insisted, were about to enter a new era, an era of recognition, of reward, of respect. The cameras flashed. The headlines wrote themselves. Dana White, once again, positioned as the visionary who took care of his people. But there was something missing, something Dana conveniently left out of his victory speech, something that didn't make it into the press release or the celebratory social media posts. The fighters noticed, and they weren't buying it anymore. Let's talk about the numbers Dana White didn't mention, the numbers he hoped nobody would dig up. In 2019, the UFC generated $600 million in revenue. Solid, profitable, growing. By 2024, $1.3 billion, more than double in just 5 years. But here's the part that stings. The fighter revenue share, it didn't move, 18 to 20%, locked in place like a prison sentence. Compare that to the NBA, 50% goes to the players, the people actually performing, the people fans pay to watch, 50%. Georges St. Pierre, one of the greatest mixed martial artists ever to step into the octagon, came forward. He didn't mince words. The Paramount deal, he said, destroys fighter leverage. It locks them into a monopolistic system where they have zero negotiating power, zero control. Chris Weidman, former middleweight champion, echoed the sentiment. Fighters need full-time employee-level pay, healthcare, benefits, stability, not gig economy scraps. The fans, they were divided. Some celebrated the bonus increases. Viral posts flooded Twitter and Instagram. But the majority? They saw through the smoke and mirrors because base pay hadn't changed. $10,000, $12,000. That's what fighters earned to step into a cage and risk permanent brain damage. And then, a pay slip leaked online. $20,000 after taxes. For a main event win, the internet lost its mind.
People like to push the buttons and talk about fighter pay, and you don't ever see us coming out and talking about it or doing whatever, because I don't give a shit. When I got 20-something-year-old Jake Paul, a fucking YouTuber, talking about fighter pay, or these other guys on the internet, we know what the hell we're doing over here. And at the end of the day, my philosophy is always this: it's nobody's business what these fighters are making. None of these guys are under some type of gag order in their contract. Any fighter on the roster can come out and tell you guys what they make.
Dana White went into full defense mode. He fired back at critics, highlighted over $300 million in fighter payouts throughout 2024. He said people didn't understand the business model, didn't understand the economics, didn't understand how the system worked. The Paramount deal, he kept repeating, would be good for everyone. Just trust the process, trust the vision. But he never gave specifics, never explained how the money would trickle down, never laid out a concrete plan, just vague promises wrapped in corporate language. Behind closed doors, UFC COO Hunter Campbell started renegotiating pay-per-view points contracts. Slow, methodical, deliberate. But fighters weren't satisfied with slow. They wanted immediate systemic change. Online petitions started circulating. Fighters and fans alike demanding transparency, demanding reform, demanding basic respect. The signatures piled up. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Dana White could feel the walls closing in, but he held firm, dug his heels in deeper. This was his empire, and he wasn't giving an inch. When journalists started using the word union, Dana White's face turned red. He called unionization a disaster, said it would destroy the sport, ruin the very thing that made the UFC special, kill opportunities for young fighters trying to break through. To make his case, he pointed to Conor McGregor, the Irish superstar, the trash-talking phenomenon who transcended the sport. Over $100 million earned throughout his UFC career. Private jets, whiskey empires, global fame. See? White said, the system works. The opportunities are there. But critics weren't impressed. McGregor, they argued, is a statistical anomaly, a once-in-a-generation talent with once-in-a-generation charisma. For every Conor McGregor living like a king, there are hundreds of fighters living paycheck to paycheck. Fighters who train full-time, sacrifice everything, and still can't afford health insurance, still can't afford to take their kids to the doctor. The McGregor argument wasn't a defense. It was an admission of inequality. But Dana didn't care. The union talk continued, and so did the tension, and neither side was willing to blink. November 2nd, 2025, UFC Fight Night 263. A seemingly ordinary event. Another Saturday night, another card, another batch of fighters chasing glory. Isaac Dulgarian versus Yadier Del Valle. Dulgarian was a rising prospect. 9 wins, 0 losses in the UFC. Momentum building. A -250 favorite. The smart money was on him. Everyone expected a dominant performance, but something was wrong.
Probably about 1 o'clock that day, we're with a company called IC360, and they are the best bet monitoring company in the business. And they reached out to us and they told us that there was some unusual action going on with that fight. Do we know anything?
Very wrong. IC360, the betting integrity monitoring company contracted by the UFC, detected anomalies, strange patterns, suspicious activity. The odds started shifting. -250 became -130. Unusual. Alarming. Sharp money. Heavy sharp money from professional gamblers was flooding in on Del Valle, the underdog. Suspicious prop bets started appearing in offshore markets.
So what we did was we called the fighter and his lawyer and said, what's going on? There's some weird action going on in your bet. Weird betting action going on in your fight. Are you Are you injured? Do you owe anybody money? Has anybody approached you to, and the kid said, no, absolutely not. I'm going to kill this guy. And, so we said, okay. The fight plays out, and first round finish by rear naked choke.
Round 1 finish. Specific methods of victory. And then, the fight happened. Dalgarian tapped early, too early, to a guillotine choke that didn't look particularly tight. His corner exploded. Audio leaked days later. You could hear the confusion, the anger, the disbelief. Fight through it. What are you doing? Analysts broke down the footage, frame by frame, slow motion.
Soon as Yater lets go of the gable grip, and now there is nothing stopping Isaac from pulling that hand down. Look at what he does. Look at what he does. His hand literally lifts off of the choking arm. He went from trying to grab it to now that that arm is free and able to pull down, his hand literally gets lifted up.
Every angle. Dalgarian looked passive, suspiciously passive, like he wasn't really trying. The MMA world went completely silent. Something was very, very wrong. The response was immediate. Sports books across Nevada moved fast. Over $5 million in bets. Refunded. Voided. Erased. The Nevada Athletic Commission didn't waste time either. They froze Dalgarian's $30,000 fight purse. Pending investigation. Pending answers. And the UFC? They moved even faster. November 3rd. Less than 24 hours after the fight, Isaac Dalgarian was released from his contract. No public investigation, no hearing, no due process, just gone. Cut. Erased from the roster. His 9-fight win streak rendered meaningless. But the damage was already spreading. The whispers were turning into shouts, and what came next would shake the entire organization to its core. And then, the floodgates opened wide. Vince Morales, a bantamweight contender, came forward publicly. Said he'd been approached, offered $70,000 to throw a fight. Cash. Untraceable. Just lose. Just take a dive. Nobody has to know. He turned it down. But he wasn't the only one. Vanessa Demopoulos, Lando Venata, both shared eerily similar stories. Shady figures approaching them. Parking lot meetings, encrypted phone calls, offers that seemed too good to be true. Because they were. Fighters started sharing their stories on social media, on podcasts, in interviews. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't isolated. This wasn't rare. This had been happening for years. Heavyweight Waldo Cortez Acosta went on record, said he'd never sell himself, that his pride, his honor, his legacy were worth more than any bribe, that he'd rather lose legitimately than win dirty. The UFC suddenly had a crisis on its hands. A reputation crisis, a legitimacy crisis. Dana White didn't just respond. He exploded. He picked up the phone and called FBI Director Kash Patel directly, the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Within days, federal agents arrived at UFC headquarters in Las Vegas. Suits, badges, briefcases. White stood in front of cameras and made a public vow. Anyone caught fixing fights would face the full weight of the law. Severe consequences, criminal prosecution, federal charges. The message was clear. This ends now. But then, contradictions started emerging. White downplayed rumors of widespread fixing, said it wasn't as bad as people thought, said IC360 had only flagged around 100 suspicious alerts throughout all of 2025. Not a big deal, he insisted. But fighters weren't coming forward with their stories. They were hesitant, scared, afraid of retaliation, afraid of being blacklisted, afraid that speaking up would end their careers. Trust was broken, and it had been broken for a long time. The question hung heavy in the air. How deep did this corruption really go? This wasn't the first time betting scandals had plagued the UFC. James Krause, a well-known coach and former fighter. The Derek Minner fight in 2022. Strange betting patterns. Offshore connections. Money moving in suspicious directions. USADA, the anti-doping agency, stepped in. Suspended him indefinitely. Banned him from cornering fighters. And now, 3 years later, Isaac Dalgarian, different fighter, different fight, but eerily similar red flags. Former gym connections to questionable characters. Offshore betting syndicates. History wasn't just repeating itself. It was getting worse. The patterns were undeniable. The connections were there, and somehow, nobody seemed surprised. Because deep down, Everyone knew. The system was vulnerable. The fighters were desperate, and desperation breeds corruption. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. The thing nobody in the UFC leadership wanted to address. 35% of UFC fighters are in debt. Credit cards maxed out, bills piling up, living on the edge. 40% have second jobs, not side hustles, not passion projects. Jobs they need just to survive. They drive for Uber at night. They teach kids martial arts classes on weekends. They work construction between training camps. They do whatever it takes to keep their heads above water. These are professional athletes, fighting on the biggest stage in combat sports, broadcast to millions around the world, and they can't afford rent. Fans started connecting the dots, started seeing the bigger picture. Peanuts pay invites this, one viral post read. Thousands of retweets, hundreds of thousands of likes. Because when a fighter is struggling to feed their family, when they're one injury away from complete financial ruin, when they're training full-time but still drowning in debt, $70,000 to throw a fight starts to look very tempting. This wasn't just a betting scandal. This wasn't just about corruption. This was about poverty, systemic poverty, institutional neglect, and everyone could see it now. In the wake of the scandal, Dana White announced a new policy. Future betting flags would result in fights being immediately canceled. No exceptions. Which raises an incredibly obvious question. Why wasn't this already the policy? How many fights had gone forward with red flags waving? With alarms blaring? With warning signs flashing? How many times had the UFC looked the other way? Because canceling a fight meant lost revenue? The silence was deafening. No answers came, just more questions. Two seismic events collided in 2025. The $7.7 billion Paramount deal promising unprecedented growth and mainstream acceptance, and the betting scandal exposing the desperation and corruption festering beneath the surface. But there was a third earthquake shaking the foundation. The antitrust lawsuit, Levi Zufa. After years of brutal legal warfare, it finally reached a settlement, $375 million. Distributed among current and former fighters who claimed the UFC had illegally suppressed their wages through monopolistic practices. Average payout? $250,000 per fighter. 35 veterans received over $1 million each. Life-changing money for some. Anderson Silva, arguably the greatest middleweight champion of all time, received approximately $10 million. Chris Lieben, a fighter who'd battled addiction and financial ruin after his career ended, reflected publicly on the years of hardship, the pain, the struggling, the injustice he'd endured while the UFC raked in billions. But not everyone celebrated the settlement. Renato Moicano, a ranked featherweight contender, rejected his $200,000 payout. He stood up publicly and declared the system fundamentally broken, called the settlement a bandage on a gunshot wound, said it changed nothing about the exploitative structure. And he was absolutely right. Ariel Helwani, one of the most respected and controversial voices in MMA journalism, broke down the Paramount deal with surgical precision. The numbers didn't add up. The narrative didn't match reality.
All to say, when Dana says it's better for the fighters, I ask him how. ABC is in as many homes as CBS. Obviously, they're going to put the premium events on CBS, at least 4, compared to the ones on ABC. And ABC didn't really turn any fighters into new stars.
Moving from ESPN to Paramount, it actually decreases the UFC's reach. ESPN's social media presence dwarfs CBS and Paramount combined. ESPN's audience is sports dedicated, passionate, engaged. Paramount's audience? Broader, yes, but more casual, less invested. And here's the kicker. The fighters? They receive exactly 0% of the $7.7 billion deal, not a penny. Compare that to the NBA. 50% revenue share guaranteed in the collective bargaining agreement.
And so when you consider that, and you also consider the fact that they're making 0% of this $7.7 billion, at least as of now, I hope to be proven wrong. 0% of that ad revenue as well, when NBA players, for example, make 50% of the TV revenue and the overall revenue, I should say. And as a result of the TV revenue, the salary cap goes up and all these things are moving up, which benefits the UFC. They have, they have certainly reached the mainstream in case there are any doubters about that sort of thing. The NFL's media rights deal, $100 billion over 11 years, but it's split up between Fox, CBS, NBC, ESPN, Amazon, Netflix, all that. The NBA's deal, $76 billion over 11.
Eddie Hearn, the prominent boxing promoter, Put it even more bluntly during an interview, UFC fighters, he said, make 5 to 7 times less than they should, than they would in any fair system. Oleksandr Usyk made $132 million for a single boxing match, an entire UFC undercard. All the fighters combined might total $50 million. Maybe. The disparity was staggering. Indefensible. The UFC was thriving, selling out arenas, signing billion-dollar deals, expanding globally. But the fighters who made it all possible, they were barely surviving. The petitions kept growing. 50,000 signatures became 60,000, 70,000. Momentum building daily. The demands crystallized, became sharper, more focused, higher base pay, real revenue sharing tied to company profits, guaranteed contracts that didn't leave fighters one loss away from unemployment, long-term health insurance covering brain trauma and chronic injuries. On November 5th, during a scheduled investor conference call, Dana White finally acknowledged the pressure. Pay increases were coming, he confirmed, tied directly to the Paramount deal revenue, but no specifics were given. No timeline, no percentages, no concrete plans. Base pay? Still sitting at $10,000, $12,000. The same poverty wages that had sparked the outrage in the first place. The fighters weren't buying the vague promises anymore. They'd heard it all before. Talk was cheap, and they were tired of being poor. By November 7th, 5 days after the Bulgarian fight, no charges had been filed.
Literally, the first thing we did was call the FBI. So we called the FBI. I've met with the FBI twice today. So that's the whole thing. Now you see.
But the FBI investigation was quietly expanding, widening its scope. Bribe amounts were coming to light through fighter testimonies. $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 in some cases. Amounts that exceeded what many fighters earned in an entire year of fighting. Let that sink in.
If you try to do this, I've been very vocal and very open about this. We will be your worst enemy. We will immediately go after you, guns a-blazing, with the FBI and whoever else we need to get. And we will do everything we can to make sure you go to prison.
Someone would pay a fighter more to lose than the UFC would pay them to win. The scale of the problem was becoming impossible to ignore. Investigators were following money trails, interviewing fighters privately, building cases slowly and methodically. And the question that haunted everyone remained unanswered. How many fights, over the past 5 years, had been compromised? As 2025 limped toward its conclusion, 3 questions dominated every conversation in the MMA world. Will base pay increase meaningfully? Or just token adjustments designed to quiet the critics? Will the UFC finally adopt real revenue sharing? Give fighters a genuine stake in the business they build? Will fighters gain actual leverage? The kind of negotiating power that prevents exploitation? The UFC operates like a major league sports organization. The octagon remains what it's always been, a place of glory, a place of sacrifice, where warriors test themselves against the very best in the world, where champions are forged in fire, where dreams come true and sometimes die. But the fight outside the cage, the fight for fairness, for dignity, for basic human respect, for a living wage, that fight is just beginning. The future of UFC fighter compensation remains an open battle, the outcome uncertain, the stakes higher than ever. And the fighters, they're not backing down, not anymore. They've tasted poverty while building a billion-dollar empire. They've watched executives get rich while they drove Uber between fights. They've bled for pennies while the cameras captured millions. But 2025 changed something, woke something up. The warriors are uniting, and this time, they're fighting for themselves.